Between 1869 and 1978, the United States government ran 408 boarding schools designed to take Native American children away from their families, and the last one did not close until the year disco was still on the radio. The children who walked through those doors were given new names, forbidden from speaking their own language, and in thousands of documented cases never walked back out. In 1869, a United States Army officer named Richard Henry Pratt was given a problem to solve. The problem, as the federal government framed it, was simple. Native American tribes across the continent were resisting forced removal from their lands. The wars were expensive. The negotiations were failing, and the government needed a solution that did not involve continued military conflict. Pratt believed he had found one. You could not destroy a people by killing them, he argued. You could destroy them by removing everything that made them who they were. His philosophy was recorded in a speech he gave in 1892. And the words he used that day became the operating doctrine of a system that would run for over 100 years. Kill the Indian, save the man. That phrase is not a metaphor someone invented after the fact. It is a direct quote from the man who designed the system. It is in the documented record, and it was the official guiding principle of 408 schools that processed hundreds of thousands of Native American children across more than a century of operation. The first school opened in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in 1879. Pratt modeled it on a military prison facility he had previously run for Native American war captives, and the choice of location was deliberate. Carlisle was far enough from Native American territories that children sent there had no practical means of returning home. Distance was part of the design. The school took in children as young as 5 years old. On arrival, children were stripped of their clothing and dressed in military-style uniforms. Their hair was cut. Many Native American cultures understood the cutting of hair as a marker of mourning or defeat. The children understood what it meant. The administrators understood what it meant. It was done anyway. Children were assigned English names. Their given names, the names their families had called them, were replaced with names selected from a list. Some children were renamed after American presidents. Some were named after the administrators who processed them. Speaking their native languages was forbidden. Children who were caught speaking their own language were punished. The punishments documented in survivor testimony included being made to scrub floors with toothbrushes, being denied meals, and physical discipline that the school's own internal records described with careful clinical language. Communication with families was monitored. Letters sent home were read by school administrators before they were mailed. Letters received from families were read before they were delivered to children. In documented cases, letters were not delivered at all. The federal government did not operate these schools alone. Religious organizations administered a significant portion of the system under contract with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Catholic, Protestant, and other denominational institutions ran schools across the country, receiving federal funding per child enrolled. The incentive structure was straightforward. More children meant more funding. Agents working for the Bureau of Indian Affairs were dispatched to Native American communities to collect children for enrollment. The word collect is used in the official records. Parents who refused to surrender their children faced consequences documented in federal correspondence, including the withholding of food rations that the government was obligated to provide under treaty agreements. In some cases, children were taken without parental consent being sought at all. This is not an interpretation. It is documented in the field reports of the agents who carried out the removals. The conditions inside many of these schools were documented by the schools themselves in internal records that sat in federal archives for decades before researchers were permitted to examine them properly. Children arrived at schools that were chronically underfunded relative to the per-child grants the government provided. The gap between the funding allocated and the funding spent on the children is documented in federal audits from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Food was inadequate. Heating was inadequate. Medical care was inadequate. Tuberculosis moved through school populations with regularity. The death records that survived show children dying at these schools at rates that the federal government's own investigators flagged as alarming in reports that were filed, archived, and not acted upon. In 2022, the United States Department of the Interior released an investigative report after a 2-year review of federal boarding school records. The report identified over 50 burial sites associated with these schools. It documented the deaths of over 50 children whose remains were never returned to their families. The investigators noted that the full scale of deaths could not be determined because many records had not survived. The records that did survive told enough of the story. The abuse documented in survivor testimony spans the entire operational period of the system. Physical abuse was reported at schools run by federal employees and at schools run by religious organizations. Sexual abuse was reported at schools in multiple states across multiple decades. Some of this abuse was reported to supervisors at the time. Some supervisors were the individuals committing the abuse. Some complaints were filed with federal oversight bodies. The federal responses documented in the archive show a consistent pattern. Investigations were opened. Investigators visited schools. Reports were filed. The schools continued operating. In 1928, a federal investigator named Meriam produced a report called The Problem of Indian Administration. The report documented conditions at boarding schools in clinical and damning language. It described inadequate food, inadequate medical care, child labor practices, and educational outcomes that were failing by any measurable standard. The federal government received the report, revised some policies. The schools continued operating for another 50 years. The last federally operated Native American boarding school did not close until 1978. Some of the children who passed through these schools are still alive. Some of them are still searching for the records of siblings who entered a school and were never accounted for. Some are still waiting for remains that the Department of the Interior confirmed are sitting in institutional collections that have not yet returned them. The system ran for 109 years. The apology came in 2024, 155 years after the first child walked through the doors at Carlisle. The documents cited in this video are publicly available. The 2022 Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative Investigative Report is available through the United States Department of the Interior. The Meriam report from 1928 is archived at the National Archives. The survivor testimonies referenced are documented through the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition at boardingschoolhealing.org. If you are the kind of person who keeps asking why the official version never quite matches the documented record, you already know why this channel exists. Subscribe, because we are not done.